Hello, everybody. It's Marianne Bailey with the Hip Senior Podcast. Today, I am here with Dan Nelson. He is the owner of Dancestors. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I am always intrigued by anything genealogy. We had a historian of our family, as most people do, and they're usually older people. And so I've been on this warpath of getting like younger people to be engaged with genealogy and knowing about their past and their history. So I'm excited to have you be part of Hip Connections Hub and the Hip Senior podcast as well. And let's get a little bit into who you are and what your business is and what you do.
Sure. I've always had a lifelong passion for genealogy and ancestry. I never thought of myself doing it as a career in my early years.
Right.
Even though there was times I thought, wow, if I could, I would do this because it's fun, but it didn't pay a lot of bills. And so I had a 42-year career in the corporate world where I managed people and managed productivity. So I think that prepared me well for this. And then around 2015, somebody I knew through a business group said, hey, would you research my wife's family? So I'm thinking 10 pages stapled in the corner, favor for a friend kind of thing. And he said, no, I want to pay you and I want you to put in a book. So that sort of was the ignition for where we're at today.
Isn't that funny how that happens? I had someone one time that had me, I want you to create a brochure for us. Okay. Okay. That looks great. Now have it printed. Wait, what? And now suddenly I had become a print broker. I get it. It's things that we don't expect launch us into things that we completely were not expecting moving forward in our lives.
Right.
So, what are some unique and special things that you do as a genealogist and through your business that maybe some other people in the same type of businesses, because there's a ton of genealogists out there, but not all of them are Dan Nelson. So, what are some special and unique things that set you aside?
Yeah, so I think the biggest difference is our niche is doing family history books. And that is because I had a unique start because the person I was speaking about, he was a CEO or division head. And so he wanted a book. We'd never done books before. And it was like, hey, I need to do it for my own family. My dad had about 2 years of cognition left. So you always think you're going to find more. Oh, I shouldn't stop because, there's going to be one more ancestor I'm going to find. That's the curse of the genealogist. So we said, let's put ours into books. And we did it. And while the information was very accurate and we had tons of pictures and all that, but the presentation was wanting because nobody gets good at it because you would do your own family and be done. You wouldn't keep doing it. But a lot of these people that were in the business group, they were CEO types and they'd say, oh, I want to get one of those for my family for Christmas. Solves my, what do I do for Christmas that's a bigger gift than last year problem. And so more and more of them kept doing it. So I started out with a above middle class group of customers who wanted books. So we got really good at doing the books. We've done over 90. I'll do another 10 this year. Pretty sure of that. Now we do lots of things besides books, but I would say that's the big differentiator because we know how to do the books and we know what makes sense. Because when you build a book, you can't just build it for the person that has the family tree in their head. You mentioned you had a family historian, they would have in their head. You got to write it for all the people that don't. And so you got to think, how do they get through this? Because it can be a struggle if you don't have some good orientation about how you move through a book. So we've gotten better and better at those. And that's our niche. But we do all kinds of things for people too, besides books. That's just a big differentiator.
What other kind of things do you do?
For instance, we just got a couple of projects we did this year where people want to travel to where they're from. So they want us to find out where that is. Right. In some cases, find their relatives that are in another country that they don't know, but they want to connect when they go to Ireland or Poland or whatever and meet up with the second cousins. They don't even know their second cousins over. They're just assuming. So we're able to do that for them. We get calls for people to say, I want to know people with my surname throughout the world. So those are some unique things. Plenty of conventional genealogy. And then we do lots of forensic work where we figure out who's somebody's father or grandfather, mother, sometimes who it is. And we do a lot of that work.
So you're real life Maury Povich.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't bring you on stage with them or anything.
Not your father.
Yes. This is your real father. Yeah. it's fun to do this because for me, uh, the career I had before was the right things on the right shelf at the right time, which was important, but there wasn't a particular joy because you were accomplishing that. Where with this, we really help people find who their parents are or just their identity in terms of their ancestry. Everybody's seen Finding Your Roots or Who Do You Think You Are and things like that. And of course, what you see there, obviously, it's designed to attract ratings and drama, but you get the tears, you get the joy from people about finding out about their ancestors. So we get to experience that, not the TV show, but through comments that people make, through things they share with us. One interesting situation we had is a couple having their first child. So they decided their way of celebrating, like a new version of gender reveal, was to let the wife's parents know by doing a family history book. So the dad had always done family history. So the the ploy was the son-in-law told his in-laws that to send all the stuff to us because we're doing a book for his wife as a surprise. The surprise was really for them. And so he filmed the video of them, you know, obviously being really emotional when they opened the book and realized there's going to be another person in this book, their grandchild. And so that was a great experience for us to get to be part of that.
Oh, you should do more of that. That's exciting.
Yeah, I'd love to do more of it. But it's obviously when people are having their first kids, usually you're not at a surplus budget position, but they happen to both be in a good spot where they could do that. So, yeah, if I could figure out how to get right to that market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The curse of all of us small businesses is finding that right market and how to get to them.
Yeah, and I was fortunate that I got to the right market early on. The market's harder for me to connect to now because I'm not in the business world. But I tell people that our typical client is somebody that's in touch with their mortality, so 50s plus, and has discretionary income, and this is of interest to them. And so we got to create value when they become a client so that they want to do more of it and are feeling like they're using their finances wisely. So that's really what we strive to do. But you mentioned that you being an advocate for people doing it when they're younger, before all the stories are lost and the generations have
Right.
passed on. We're getting more and more calls like that, where proactively young couples in their 40s are saying, we want to leave a legacy for our children. And we want to start on it now before that whole generation is gone, or we forget the stories that we heard. Because even if you're in your 40s, you're going to forget stuff by your 50s. And it's the stuff you're probably not saying very often, repeating. So that's a really promising trend for future historians and genealogists in the sense that people are getting started earlier. The fun thing for it too is because they're more technically sound. So when we go through the editing process, they're able to do a lot of it themselves. Where you get a client in their 80s, they're not going to be as good with that. So we take that on. But
That's another thing, though, is that having those clients in the 80s, I would imagine switch gears from a little bit from having being marketing towards people, but as on a business aspect of things and finding right customers for your business and stuff is perhaps reaching out to those clients who have recently been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they're still cognitive enough to be able to remember their stories and making sure that their stories are told so that younger generations have those available to them, right? And being able to do books like this and get that information out to whether it's family members or to you or whoever, to be able to do that. Because so many people will focus on the fact of having Alzheimer's or dementia or Parkinson's, whatever the story may be, cancer, whatever, and they just start to decline quickly. Maybe they haven't had a chance to meet someone like you to be able to get those things out to.
yeah, no, that's an opportunity for us there. And of course, like most families, everybody's got something. That runs on one side of my family. So
Right.
yeah, I'm very aware of that. We do support a charity called Allie's Wish, and it's a Ronald McDonald House for mothers that have terminal illnesses, where they
Oh,
grant a last wish for them. So a lot of them it's travel, family trip, but some aren't in condition to do that. So we also offer, if they're interested, where we do their family uh, tree so that they can hang it on the wall so their kids have some legacy. So it's not in depth like a book because people probably don't have the energy for something like that
right.
at that point when they're fighting something. But if they can just tell us who their grandparents are, we got a good shot of collecting a lot of good information and filling out that tree. So uh, that's again, joyous and rewarding to us that we're helping out some people in rough circumstances. And there's lots of charities we support with cash, some with time, but that's one where it directly ties into where our expertise is. So it's a perfect match.
And you're not just a business of one. You have people that work with you, correct?
Yeah, so it was me and my wife, and then COVID hit, and my 3 month queue quickly went to a year, and I could see it going to 3 years. And while Americans were learning to wait for things like refrigerators and so forth, I didn't think they really wanted to wait for something like this. So I knew all these talented genealogists through groups and interactions, and they didn't really like dealing with the public or good at dealing with dead people because that's what you do is you research people. There's not
Right.
a lot of interaction. Being in the business world for so long, I thrive around live people, but I also enjoy researching people that have passed. And so it was a great setup because they get to do what they love, which is the research and the pursuit of family history, and I bring the clients. So I've got 14 people that work for me. For those, mostly do forensic work or society work, meaning qualifying people for membership, Mayflower Society, DAR, Sons of the American Revolution.
Hold on.
The forensic work is finding biological ancestors and relatives.
And you guys also have a unique specialty that not a lot of people do either in researching backgrounds for. Okay, so you have also experience in doing African American history research too, that a lot of people don't do, correct?
Correct. I actually have in my group an African American genealogist. He's written 2 books on researching African American ancestry because it's a unique challenge. Obviously, you have slavery, but even post slavery, there's lots of challenges. And so he's made me very aware of how to do that research.
Why is that a challenge? What are some examples of challenges that would come up with that?
We all are pretty educated on the horrors of slavery,
Right.
but there were many things done after that make it hard to research their ancestry. So you had things like the Jim Crow laws and redlining and so forth. All those things, while maybe not the original intention, they caused African Americans to be captured less frequently in government records. So it's just more of a challenge in that regard, but we made good progress in getting around those challenges. And frankly, for DNA work, more of my clients, I haven't done a survey or added it up, but I believe at least half are of African descent because what I'm told by them is that they were told not to ask. Family doesn't want to talk about it. It's not a pretty story, whatever, which you can see why when you think back to slavery.
Right.
But now they're saying, no, I want to know. It's part of my identity and I need to know. And we work with a lot of folks. And it's not just African Americans. That's a group that, say, 20 years ago probably wasn't that active in genealogy and family history. And now there's a whole, not only a client base, but people experienced at doing it.
And modern society prevails in that, right? It's not uncommon to see a Black woman or a Black gentleman and married to the opposite race or a different race or whatever, because that's more allowed and more accepted these days. That's why history is allowing the truth to come out more as well in those areas as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that plays a big part in it. It's funny, and I haven't been around since the beginning of genealogy, but I'm sure at the turn of the century, 2 centuries ago, it was primarily focused on people with money, Eastern Seaboard, the status, hoity-toity, if you will, and they had the discretionary income. They'd been in New York City or Boston for a long time, and there was this great family history and inheritance and things to capture. But I would say with the last century, it was definitely more getting down to the middle class, the lower middle class, and you had people reaching out that may not have ever thought they could do something like that before, as the internet, with all its evils of anybody put any junk out there, also is a great way to exchange information, collect, store information. So it's allowed that to spread. And that's, I think, created a lot of the groundswell. But COVID was a huge driver, unfortunately, but a silver lining of people being interested. And then the DNA, because Americans are always looking for cool little stocking stuffers. So suddenly DNA kits became the stocking stuffer.
Right. If somebody is interested in getting with you, I know that you're offering Hip Connections Hub customers 1 hour free research as well as a $25 off coupon when they purchase. I think it's 9 or 10 hours, correct? That is on our site as well. But other than that, what are some questions they need to be asking themselves if they're interested in having you do some work with them?
One of the things is, and we narrow this down with our agreement, is what are their priorities? Because since it's not something do if you just take your car into the shop and say, make my car better, you know, there's a lot of answers to that question. You mean
Right.
look better, run better, is it shifting properly, whatever. It's the same thing with ancestry. What is it you're most interested in? And of course, oftentimes the answer is all of it. Take me back as far as you can. And if they have the budget for that, that's a great customer to knock on our door. But we try and say, how far do you want to get? Do you want to focus on your surname, since men have that their whole lives and women do for 20, 25 years? So there's a lot of interest in that. Or do you want an even tree? If you think of a family tree all across the top, even. So we went back 4 generations on all lines and not shooting off longer on a surname or something like that. Do you want to get to Revolutionary War? Are you interested in society membership? Do you want to get to things like who's your immigrant ancestor? That's the most common answer. I want to know who was the one that landed on the shore. Some people are like, I want to go further. I want to know where they came from and how they were related to me. So we help them narrow that down, because all is certainly something we could work with, but we want to make sure the customer is sensing value. And if you do 10, we mostly work in 10-hour segments. So you do 10 hours worth of work, you get your report. And so 10 hours in may feel like a small piece to all, because you're not going to trace somebody's entire family history in 10 hours. Because we all have the same amount of ancestors, just not the same amount of discoverable ancestors.
That's an interesting statement. I would imagine that newlyweds, even though their budget is quite small, would also possibly be a good customer of yours simply because of the fact, like newlyweds that want to, oh, my family's from Ireland. I want to go to Ireland for a honeymoon. And while we're there, let's check out some of our other family, like you had mentioned earlier. Can they pick and choose like pieces of, I just want to know where my family is in Ireland. So when on my honeymoon, I can go visit them?
Sure, absolutely. We can do that kind of work. And of course, people are interested because they're marrying this other person. And so, like, they're inheriting a family, one they may or may not like after a while. But so they want to know, and if they're going to have children together, it's what are we tying together here DNA wise? So, yeah, people are curious about that. And it's interesting because on social media, my greatest followers are young females, which I wish I'd known that in high school. I would have told all those girls I was interested in genealogy, but that's not my customer base. But part of that, I'm sure, is they don't have the discretionary budget.
Right.
But I think a lot of young women are interested because it's part of nurturing the family. Where's it come from? Where's it going? What are my children going to, inherit as a legacy? So I do think that if they could get across the threshold budget wise, that a lot of them would be interested.
You mentioned having children. Another part of that is making sure, and even though younger people necessarily cannot afford your services, perhaps they can, as a Christmas gift or something, get with their parents and get them to do this research, pay for this research also, because it is important if there's any question of African American history in your family tree or whatever. Sometimes that can lead to different health issues within children that people should be aware of before
Yeah.
considering having children, or once they have children, if there's children are having health reasons and they can't explain why, maybe looking back at some of the past history for that as well.
Yeah, and we do get, particularly the daughters, go to getting the dads to say, "Hey, come on, let's spring for this and do it. It'd
Yeah.
be great for our family to have this knowledge and be able to share it amongst us." But yeah, that is a driver also. And we do get people that they start with the DNA because they want the immediate question, and then they come back to us a year, 2 years, 3 years later, and they say, "Okay, I've digested that. I've processed. This is who my father is, or my grandfather. Now I want to know more about my biological ancestors." Obviously, there's not a nurturing, I knew them when I was growing up tie, but
Right.
they want to know more about their DNA and where they came from. People aren't necessarily one and done clients because they have to process that. And one of the things that I set up I used to do a radio show with a psychologist, and she got me thinking about it because I have all these people that come and we give them this news. Oh, here's who your daddy is. And you're like, that's a big deal. And so there's all these support services for lots of things we face in our life. There aren't any for that. And so I finally found a psychologist, a counselor type person who found out after she was in that position that her dad was not her dad. One of those surprise results from the stocking stuffer. Yeah. So she's uniquely qualified because she went through all those emotions in terms of its rage and but happy that you're alive and all kinds of things that
Yeah.
go through. And she set up, she could only do referrals in the state she's in, but she got a network set up for me. So whenever we do someone's ancestry and surprise, here's your dad, I always refer to them to that. Of course, I don't know if anybody's ever taken advantage because it's all confidential.
Right.
But I think it can help people because it's quite a load to have that land in your lap. That now, and a lot of people, they wondered their whole life and they finally said, I'm going to take the step. I'm going to go find out. And then they find out and they're like, wow, what do I do with this information? How do I feel about it? And we have people that chicken out. They won't complete the form to let us access their DNA results.
And that's understandable too. Everybody has to do those things on their own terms and when they're ready and what they're comfortable with. Speaking of that, so there are websites out there that you can sign up for and do your own DNA research or your own genealogy research.
Yes.
I'm sure some of those become clients of yours. We don't, now that we're back to normal a little bit, people are working from home or back into the office and stuff like that. We don't have as much spare time as we did during COVID. So are there people that maybe start out on some of those sites, maybe a free account or a very low subscription, and they just say, you know what, I don't have the bandwidth to do this. I'm going to hire Dan to do the rest of this research. Or they get so involved in it, they're like, okay, I've gone as far as I can handle or I can do on here. There's got to be more. And then they call you.
Yeah, that happens all the time for a couple of reasons. One is you need pedigree brain to do this. So if you don't, it's easy to get lost on where you're at and what you're doing. You get a lot of stuff, but what do I do with it kind of feeling? And then there's cost. It's while you're doing it yourself, there's cost of obtaining that information. And then I think people realize eventually that all that information is not vetted. You can put anything on any site and there's nobody saying, oh no, you can't put that in here. That's not accurate. If I want to go in there and say that you're my sister, there's nobody stopping me from doing that. So people put weird stuff in there because, gee, I want to be connected to somebody with the last name Bailey, and sourcing and validating information. So another thing we do for people is we audit their trees. So they accept all these hints. They build it all back and they go, that was a little too easy. How do I know all those hints I accepted were accurate? They're usually not. So they pay us to go in and audit their tree and create a log of what we consider someone else's ancestor, not yours. And so it really needs to be removed from your tree. And so that's another thing that we do there. But it's like anything. So back to the car example. I'm sure with, they used to call them Chilton's manuals, but with YouTube videos, I could figure out how to do some major work on my vehicle. But I'm not very efficient at it. I'm not very good at it. So yes, it'd be less expensive than a mechanic in terms of what you're paying per hour, but I know it's right when it's done. I know my car will stop if I have someone else work on the brakes. If I work in the brakes, I put my family in jeopardy. Genealogy, if you do it yourself, if you're not careful, you can end up working on someone else's family history, not your own, because you assume that's your ancestor, or you want to so bad because the family story was you descend from this famous person, but you really don't. And we get those calls all the time. I had a guy call me the other day and he says, hey, I just found out from a DNA test that I'm Oprah's fourth cousin. He was up in Memphis, so that's my accent playing there. And he said, can you give me her email address so I can let her know? And apparently he thinks genealogists have celebrity email addresses. So I said, oh, I would call her agent. I'm sure he'll give it to you. But there's people want to know how they're related to people, which I did a little work with it just to see if I could figure it out for him. And Oprah's more closely related to Elvis Presley than to that guy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I thought that was
okay.
I found that out. Yeah.
I think I know in my mom's past history, there's some stuff involved where somebody was potentially adopted by family members or this or that, or someone, and the story is not really clear. And so I would imagine that a lot of people could get hung up and go down wrong roads based on not knowing there was a name change involved somewhere along the line somewhere. And that could send you down a completely wrong path.
And that's what's great about DNA. In some cases, without DNA, we couldn't make any progress, particularly when you're talking about adoptions or children created out of wedlock. But with people who have conventional genealogy and ancestors and think everybody came about in the normal process, you can use DNA to validate that and find it out and find out there was a name change where you wouldn't have been able to do that 20 years ago. So we use the two tools together. And I'll even have projects where I'll have a forensic researcher work on it and then switch it back over to conventional. And the reason I do that is the forensic researchers, the others are just as talented with forensic work. They could do it. For instance, if I went and figured out who your biological parent was, it would take me 25 hours, but these other forensic researchers can do it in 10 hours because they do it so often. And anything, if you do all the time, you stay on the edge of the science, you're going to be more efficient because we really work hard to make sure that we're being efficient in terms of doing this research. We don't see it as, oh, it is what it is. That's why we work in the small amount of hours segments so that we can make sure people are getting good value as we go through it.
Interesting. You've given me like a ton of questions that I have that we don't have time for. So I am excited again that you're part of Hip Connections Hub. I hope people will go check out your page in there. I'll have all your information listed below. They can just go to your page and find you and find articles from your blog and different newsletter stuff, information, as well as hopefully we'll have on there also an example of one of your books that you put together that people can go see and see what it is that they would be getting if they ordered a book from you as well.
Great.
Dan, thank you.
I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate you coming and spending some time with me. And again, Dan with Dancestors Genealogy, Dan Nelson. And like I said, I'll have all his information below, so go check him out. Thanks all for watching the Hip Senior podcast, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.